Hello, everyone, and welcome to our 14th episode of Corpus Christi Forum. My name is Father Joseph Lopez. I'm the pastor at St. Gertrude, the Great Catholic Church in Kingsville, Texas.
And I am Father Vasquez, pastor of St. John the Baptist in Corpus Christi, Texas.
And in this episode, we're going to be discussing a little bit of etiquette at the celebration of Mass. I know, as we all know, that right now during this pandemic, for a while, we weren't at Mass, and we slowly started returning to Mass. And we thought that perhaps we could go through a few reminders of what we expect and not expect when we attend Mass. So the first thing is looking at prior to Mass and preparation before going to Mass. Father, you want to touch a little bit on that?
Yeah, I think it's important for us to spend a little time preparing for Mass, and it begins for us with the Eucharistic fast, something that I think that we don't talk about enough, and that maybe some younger Catholics may not even know or be aware of, and that is that we are required to fast for 1 hour prior to the reception of Holy Communion. Now, it's sometimes hard to remember when that takes place during the Mass, at which time marker. So it's easier to just think 1 hour before Mass, not to eat. So sometimes when you go to Mass, particularly if you go to Mass in the middle of the day on Sunday, or even at the end of the day, if you're going to receive communion and approach Holy Communion, if you are able to receive communion, it is required of us that we do not eat or drink anything, and that includes chewing gum, mints, even before Mass, except for water. Now, that rule doesn't apply if you have a health condition. So let's say you're a diabetic and you have to eat something or you have to take food with medicine. So that wouldn't apply to you then. But for the rest of us, it is a reminder of sort of a spiritual act that we would make, a sacrifice before coming to Mass. Now, up until the changes at the Second Vatican Council, that used to be 12 hours. That's why Catholics would go to Mass only in the mornings. No one would go at the end of the day, because it's hard to fast an entire day. And that's why after you go to Mass, then you can break the fast or breakfast. It also works the same in Spanish. So it is a spiritual sacrifice made for those who are preparing for communion. So it's important to begin to think that way in preparing yourself for Mass. But a couple of things that when you get to the parking lot, there's a few things that you should also remember, and that is the cell phone, for instance. Many Catholics, I've noticed in my parish, use their cell phones to follow along the Mass or the readings for Mass. They may not want to, at this point, use the missals or missalettes that are available in the church simply because of the spread of the virus. So they've been using their phones. That's fine and everything, but I think it would be important to make sure your phones are on silent because of silence in the church, which is so important for prayer. We have to set an atmosphere in the church for prayer. And so a phone randomly going off in the middle of Father's homily, or randomly going off, particularly at the moment of the consecration at Mass, or in a beautiful moment when music, sacred music, is being listened to in the church, for a phone to go off, especially with people who have all these cell tones or ringtones with music, none of us need our phones to be going off in the church. So it's very important, particularly for women who keep their phones in their purses and then it goes off. It takes them a while to find it and actually turn it off. It's best to leave it in your vehicle or just not bring it to the church at all. We can manage for 1 hour without our cell phones. There are a few other things, and Father, you wanted to talk about perhaps walking into the church, what we are required to do.
Yeah, one of the things also Before you mentioned about in the parking lot and on the way to mass when we're driving, I think one thing to keep in mind as maybe even a helpful preparation before arriving the church is also be attentive to what we're listening to on the radio, and even conversations that we may be having, whether we're speaking to somebody on the phone through the Bluetooth or people that may be in the vehicle with us as well. Are those conversations and or the music or talk shows that we're listening to conducive to assisting us in preparation for the celebration of Mass? So in other words, listening to profane lyrics of music, or suggestive lyrics in music, or the particular topic of a talk show that we may be listening to, or the language that we may be using when we're having a conversation, um, may not be helpful in preparing us to go into a sacred moment. Again, that's just something to keep in mind upon arriving the church. And once we do arrive, keeping in mind, what our tradition is as Catholics when we enter the church. So, of course, during this time, we do have our protocols and guidelines that we are required to follow, such as sanitizing our hands and having holy water available. So right now, we don't necessarily have most parishes don't have holy water in the fonts right now, but there may be occasions. For example, at my parish, we do have an usher that is offering holy water through the small holy water bottles
Mhm.
for us to bless ourselves upon entering, as a reminder of our baptism, and also that we are entering into the sacred space. I think it's very important to remember to do. And then once we do enter into the church, remembering that our Lord is present there in the tabernacle, and we make sure that He's the first one that we offer acknowledgement to, and usually that's done through a genuflection before we go into our place of whether it be a pew or chair, whatever the case may be, and also if our knees don't function properly, and can't make a proper genuflection, which is the right knee touching the floor, then a bow, a reverent bow, is certainly appropriate if we're not physically able to make the genuflection. And then also keeping in mind, as you mentioned, the importance of silence.
Mhm.
The silence sends great volumes, so to speak, of what we think about, outwardly expressing what we think about in the place that we are at. So if we're loud and abruptive, especially if there's people already there in the church praying and preparing themselves for Mass, and we come in and are starting to carry up conversations with other people, or just being disruptive, it's first of all disrespectful to our Lord, but second of all, it's not very charitable to the people that are around us that are preparing for Mass. So those are the things that I would offer in preparation once we enter into the church and preparing for the celebration of Mass.
Yeah, you mentioned the kind of things that you do on the vehicle on the way over, and you talked about things that you listen to on the radio or even the conversations that you're having. And I thought of things like gossip. We're on the phone gossiping, and then we're going to mass. That's the last thing we want to do is commit a sin that would not allow us to receive communion. Because if it got to the point where my gossip, it can be vicious or hurtful and spread lies, then I may have to consider the fact that I just committed a mortal sin, or at least potentially, and would not be able to approach the Blessed Sacrament at communion time. And it certainly is the worst position to have or disposition to have. Sometimes I talk about, when you leave church, I've talked about when there's one group coming and the other group is leaving, and that we have a small parking lot, just be patient. The last thing you want to do is lose the graces that you gained at Mass by, then yelling and screaming at somebody who just because they didn't move fast enough. So I think, yeah, a proper disposition of prayer. Silence, and you're going to hear us talk a little bit about that a lot today. Silence is really important part of Mass. And it's also a good idea, just turn the radio off. Just not have conversations on the way to church unless they're really important family conversations. maybe just saying a little prayer together as the family. If I was the dad driving my family in, a Suburban or whatever, maybe I would tell them, let's say a few prayers before we get to the church. That might be a really good way to prepare the family, the whole family, particularly children, for Mass. So you talk about genuflection, is the other thing that you touched on. I always like to use the mental picture of if you're invited to a party or to a dinner at someone's home, and a lot of you are invited to that dinner. When you get to the house, you ring the doorbell and the door opens and you come in. You generally, at least naturally, look for the masters of the house, the husband, the wife, and you go greet them to let them know that you're here. At the end of the party, you do the very same thing. You go let them know that you have to leave now, and then thank you very much for having me over at your house. It was wonderful, et cetera, et cetera. When you come to Mass, you've been invited to a dinner party, per se. And the master of the house isn't the priest. He's the waiter. The master of the house is the Lord. And so we greet the Lord. We don't ignore him. And that's why it's important when we come in to make some sign of reverence, generally a genuflection. We can use the pew to help us if we need to, or a sign of the cross, or as you said, Father, if your knees aren't working really well, a bow of the head, but at least to do something to show that we know who's present in the church. And the same way on the way out. Now, as priests, we can see that. I see it. When Mass is started and people are coming in, they just walk into the pew. And it saddens me because I think they just ignored the Lord. They just completely ignored him. They're here to see him. They're not here to listen to me. They're not here to listen to the music. They're not here to see their friends. They're here to see the Lord. That's why it's important. And it's a practice that we've developed in the church throughout the centuries to help form us that way, to show us why this is important. And I think along those lines as well is how we dress. Now, I don't like to tell people exactly what to wear. I've seen parishes who will put that in their bulletin. Here's what you can, here's what you can't wear. I don't like to do that because I think people are adults. I like to show it by my own example. I wear dress shoes, I wear dress pants, I wear my priestly cassock, that which I'm wearing now, plus all of the vestments. So when people tell me, well, it's because it's so hot, I come in shorts. Look how many things I'm wearing, and I'm under the lights. That's not really an excuse. We're not called to come to church to be comfortable. And we certainly would never dress down to something important, whatever it might be, a job interview, a wedding, although I've seen people dress very poorly for that too. So it's a matter of a certain demeanor, a certain respect of how we should properly dress. I don't mean to impose this on anybody. When I was growing up, my grandfather, my dad's father, was very traditional, very traditional. And he once told me that a grown man should never wear shorts, not in public. The men should wear pants. That's always stuck in my head. Now that's a personal thing. That's not a universal norm. That's a very traditional way of thinking. But there's something about that too. What he was trying to say is a grown man carries himself with dignity and respect, and that was what he was trying to teach us. I think for men and women, how we dress speaks a lot about who we are and what we believe about what we're doing, what we value. If you invite me to a wedding, I'm going to dress up for that wedding if I value you. If I don't care about you, I'll wear a sports jersey or a t-shirt, which I've seen. Why would we do that to the Lord? I've appealed to people in my parish many times about that. Just saying, it doesn't have to be a suit and a tie for men or a long dress, and not what I mean. If that's what you want to do, feel free to, but a little bit more respectful to what it is that we are coming to. Now, I'm telling you this in the middle of August in South Texas, when today in Corpus Christi we're experiencing a heat advisory, and the heat index should be 114. It's hot, and certainly it is. But I'm also telling you this in South Texas, where every one of our churches mostly is air conditioned. Mine is. And some people tell me it's cold in the church. Yeah, because it's hot outside and I have to wear layer upon layer of clothing. So if it's a little too cold for you, you can bring a jacket or something. But it's because, you know, we don't want you to be uncomfortable, but at the same time, we want you to feel that you can dress and show your reverence by the way you dress for Mass. It's totally up to you how that looks like. Um,
The way I always like to express or explain, insofar as an analogy, is especially for Sunday Mass, um, it's the most important thing that we do for the week. Most important over our jobs, over the gatherings or parties, whatever. It's the most important thing. And again, the way we dress is an outward expression of what we think about where we're going and what we're doing. So, what's most important to us? Outwardly express that by our attire. I think that's, and just something just to keep it in mind. Um, and when we do prepare for that, um, I think it's also one of the things that people, and it's inadvertent. I know that a lot of people, really don't think about it that much, and never really, they might be dressed down, but yet really are reverent to our Lord and reverent, at Mass. But again, it's an outward expression of what we think about, or the way we think about what we're doing and where we are.
yeah. Yeah, and some, like you said, some people don't think about it, but that's exactly why we're talking about it.
Yeah.
To help people, to help Catholics understand that this is part of etiquette. This is part of manners, of what you do when you come to church. And the kids should be dressed up too. I mean, I remember as a kid, particularly, for church, we would wear school clothes, the clothes that we bought for school, my mom would always, dress shirt, dress pants, nice shoes, or whatever we would wear. But for us in my household, it was never okay to wear t-shirts and jeans even.
Yeah.
It was a little bit nicer. And
Hmm.
at Christmas, I remember it was a big deal because we would get a tie to wear for Christmas Mass, because it got a little bit nicer for the big events like Christmas and Easter. Um, and that's also where we learn to dress up. It's also where we learn to carry ourselves with greater dignity. I think it's a product of the times. One of my favorite things to do is watch movies from, and we'll talk a little bit about this a little later, but movies from the 50s and the 60s, or even the 40s, where the men are always in a suit and they're always, they have a hat, they don a hat. They're always dressed up. Maybe it's just the movies, but people learn that even if it's just to do something public, they're going to look like a man. They're going to look presentable, or a woman would present herself in a dignified manner as well. I think that's what we're saying for Mass. It's hard because we're not giving you must not wear X, Y, and Z. But I don't think we should. I
Yeah.
think the decision should be up to you if you want to wear, for like a man, a polo shirt and a pair of slacks and a nice pair of shoes, or you want to wear a full suit. That's your call. Um, and then, of course, I would never tell a woman what she should or should not wear. Uh, but it should be modest, and it should be a dignified. It tells me what you think of yourself, and you're telling the Lord what you think of Him and yourself. So if you think that and you keep that in mind, I think that should help, with guiding us in how we should prepare ourselves for Mass, at least in our exterior disposition.
And certainly, maybe the only thing that we can say not to wear for men is a hat, in the church. You know,
Right.
um,
The rule is different for women on that. Women can.
right,
But I would also tell the women to, because you're allowed to, I still would make them modest.
right.
I've seen some elaborate hats, and it takes all the attention to the person wearing it. So you don't want to be attention seeking. You don't want to have that. But to cover your head is very appropriate for a woman to do. That's why many women might wear a veil, and that certainly is their love and respect for the Lord in the Eucharist, and that's how they choose to express it. You don't have to, and you can still show your love and respect to the Lord in the Eucharist, or you can wear a hat. But for men, and the only hats that men wear are either cowboy hats today or a baseball cap or a sports cap. Certainly not appropriate for us as men to wear that in the church.
So let's talk a little bit about proper etiquette when it comes to receiving communion. There's different ways that we experience this as priests. But what's most important is being properly disposed, being able to receive communion. You want to speak a little bit to that?
Yeah. I mentioned that one time at a funeral mass. I told the people, those of you who are Catholic and are able to receive communion may come forward. One young woman waited for me and she said, I don't know what you mean by able. So I had to change that, in order to explain that for people who may not know what that meant. So what do we mean by that? What do we mean by able? I think, as you put it, there are things that we can talk about, reverence in receiving on the hand, receiving on the tongue, on your knees, after a genuflection, after a bow of the head, those kinds of things. But first, and what is most important and universal for us all, is that in order to receive Holy Communion, first I have to be a baptized Catholic who has already made my first communion. Well, that's the number one thing. So I have to be baptized Catholic that has made my first communion. So if I'm not a Catholic, maybe Southern Baptist or Presbyterian, I cannot present myself for communion in the Catholic Church. So baptized Catholic, but we also have to be baptized Catholics in the state of grace, or Catholics in good standing. Now that's important to know. Usually when we say that, Catholics in good standing, let's look at that first, we mean by that your marital state, more than anything else. So if you are married civilly, not married by the church, you cannot present yourself to receive Holy Communion, because Catholics are bound to be married by the church. So before that can happen, before that couple can receive communion again, they would need to present themselves to a priest or a deacon to help them to not bless but convalidate their marriage. Most people would say to bless their marriage, which that means is to actually get married in the church. So if you're in that state or in that situation, talk to your priest. We are greatly happy to help a couple be able to receive communion. And in many, many cases, in my experience, an overwhelming majority, it's an easy solution.
Yeah.
There are some that are a little bit harder, and then there are some that just cannot be. But at least give it a try and talk to your priest or the deacon in your parish, and they can certainly help you. But also, when we mean by Catholics in good standing, we also might mean cohabitation or living together. This is when a couple not yet married, their boyfriend, girlfriend, their fiancés, they're engaged, whatever, they begin to live together. It's presumed they're living together also means they're sexually active. If that's the case, they're living in a state outside the state of grace. In that case, living in a state of persistent sin, and therefore cannot present themselves to Holy Communion until that's resolved. And by resolved, we mean no longer living together until marriage. That's really important, because I think in our Catholic culture today, young people are forgetting that or disregarding that, assuming the church has nothing to say about that. We certainly do. And then in the state of sin. So generally in the state of sin, meaning if I have committed a mortal sin, and that might be something we have to talk about in another episode, what exactly is a mortal sin, but I have committed a grave mortal sin, I cannot go to communion until I go to confession, until I receive the absolution from a priest. Not me personally at home, I confess directly to God. No, that doesn't work. And we cannot confess directly to God. The normal means by which we are absolved of sin is through baptism or confession. And so once I've gone to confession, I'm not in the state of mortal sin. I may have had venial sins, but not mortal sins. The venial sins are forgiven during Mass, and therefore I'm in the state of grace in order to receive communion. So that's very important, that we are in the state of grace to receive Holy Communion. Otherwise, we ought not to present ourselves for communion. Now, every time I've done a little investigation and confession and asking people when they tell me that they have done that I committed sacrilege, I received communion, though I shouldn't have. And then my question always is, well, why did you? In other words, why did you approach anyway? Is it that you didn't know, or, well, I just wanted to be close to Jesus? The fact is, if we're in the state of sin, we can't get close to Jesus. Even if we were to take communion because we committed a graver sin, which separates us even further from him. So the absolute opposite happened, I told him. Instead of what you desired to be close to Jesus. Going to confession here, and then communion will absolutely unite you to the Lord. But
Right.
if you do it in another way, you will divide yourself from the Lord. So that's really important. That's the same everywhere. And I've heard many times people tell me, but Father so-and-so said, Father so-and-so said. If it's different than what we're discussing here, then no, it isn't. It isn't right to receive communion. We only incur greater sin. Now, I've also heard someone say, but Father, you didn't say anything to me when I came up, so I thought it was okay. And my response to it is, I don't know the state of your soul when you're receiving communion. Only you know the state of your soul. How would I be able to tell you that I know that you've committed mortal sin? What if you resolved that already and went to another priest for confession? If you come to confession to me, I will tell you what you shouldn't or should do. But if you've gone already, I wouldn't know that.
Right.
Therefore, I can't do that unless I know, unless you've publicly done something that has separated you from receiving communion. I can tell you, it really can't until you go to confession for that.
So we received communion, all right, and now getting ready for the end of Mass, the final blessing, and the dismissal. There's also some pieces here of etiquette as well that we'd like to touch on, and one of them, keeping with the theme of silence in prayer. Oftentimes, I don't see this too often, but one of the things, and it's not mandatory, but it is I think it could be a good practice, is after the reception of communion, to when we return to our place, continue with silence, or if there happens to be, music, sacred music playing, to participate in that if you're able to. But if not, silence is important, to reflect on what has just happened.
Mm-hmm.
We've received our Lord the most intimate way we can have a relationship with him, by receiving communion, and perhaps saying a prayer of thanksgiving for that great gift, the greatest gift that he has given to us, and also being charitable to the people around us by being silent, who may be offering their prayers of thanksgiving for having received communion.
Yeah.
So then we received the final prayer, and the blessing and the dismissal. We leave the same way we came in. And I'm not talking about the door, but the method by which we entered the church. And again, those are silence, genuflection, and holy water. As Father mentioned earlier, hey, we just partook in this great feast, this great dinner party. Now it's time to say goodbye to the host, to the master of the house, and the proper way to do that. The ideal way is through genuflection. But again, if we're not able to do that physically, then a reverent bow and some type of acknowledgement that we're giving thanks and we're leaving now. Also, I don't think it's really appropriate, even after we've done after we've said acknowledged our Lord and we're departing, to start sparking up conversations with our fellow parishioners. Yes, we're all happy to see each other. Yes, for some it may have been a while since we've seen our good friends, but always keeping in mind that there are other people in the church. And again, it's a place of reverence, and silence is important in those times. Can we take the conversation outside? That's probably going to be encouraged. Is the sun beating down 114 degrees? Possibly, but I'm sure we can find a shaded area, or perhaps even go to a place where we can spark up that conversation. But again, trying to avoid as much as possible carrying those conversations in the church, and reflecting on what we've just celebrated.
I think part of that is our fault too. The architectural structures of our churches today, and the fact that the priest likes to stand outside to greet people and parishioners, which is a noble gesture. It's good for him to stay back there to say hello to people. Because of the way churches are built today, you get to the front door and that's immediately outside in many places. And so many of our churches, like mine, we don't have an immediate gathering place where you can leave the church in silence and then move out to a different spot in the of the church where you can, or in the building where you can gather together. And by nature, people want to say hello to parishioners, to each other. We're a community. For this reason, many parishes will have many functions and events to allow for that kind of thing. And honestly, I think it's a discussion that we should have in building churches of the future, is to have that kind of space where there can be a buffer between the people who want to stay behind and pray, because a lot of people do, and that's very good for them, and the people who want to stay and say hello to others, and a lot of people do, and that's also good for them. And so while it's a suggestion that we're making, we also recognize that we are, I mean, until the pandemic hit, after Mass, I'd stand outside to say hello to people. It can be hot, especially this time of year, but it also is so close to the door that they open the door and it might as well be inside the church.
Right.
And so no one can really stay and pray. And that's a sad effect, on unintended circumstance, consequence. But nonetheless, if we're saying is to try to maintain some sort of silence, it's tough.
Yeah.
But I think if we all attempted to do something about it, we can at least try to accommodate those who want to pray and those who want to greet one another after Mass. I think we could come up with something better. But each one of us can do something, like you said, Father, maybe under a shaded area in the tree, or maybe we priests could open up the halls and let people come and sit down in the nice, cool, or warm, depending on the time of year, space where they can meet one another and fellowship with each other.
So we've covered a few things. There's a lot more to cover, and we more than likely will be addressing some of those in the upcoming episodes. But what we wanted to do is just, again, as a reminder, especially since there's been several weeks for some of us that have not been able to attend Mass and slowly coming back, just friendly reminders of why we do what we do as Catholics before, during, and even after Mass. So again, if you have any comments, or if you have any suggestions, please feel free to let us know. Moving on, Father and I do have some suggestions about some movies. The last episode, we gave some suggestions, and we got a lot of good feedback, a lot of good responses. And again, it was during that time, and we're still during the time where a lot of us are taking more to television and wanting some really good films to watch. And maybe some of us have gone through all of Netflix, but more than likely you haven't. I know that's an expression. So one of the films, Father, you want to start with one?
Yeah, I'll start with an older one. I told you earlier I like some of these older films, but particularly one of my favorite film directors is Alfred Hitchcock. Many of you are probably very familiar with some of his movies. But the one movie that I would recommend is the movie Dial M for Murder. Father is now playing the trailer for this movie. This is a great movie, and it stars Grace Kelly, one of my favorite actresses on the silver screen. It's a murder mystery, and very suspenseful. But it's such a clever story. If you really want a good dialogue, clever story, it is a movie about a murder, so please be aware that probably not good for children. In watching the trailer, I can see that. Uh, but it is a good classic film, and one definitely that if you're looking for a good film like that, I would definitely recommend it.
Okay. How about what's your the next film?
Yeah, one more, and that is a more modern film. Was made in 2017. The movie is called The Darkest Hour. It features the life of Sir Winston Churchill, Prime Minister of Great Britain, in the moments leading up to the Second World War before the Americans got into the war. He was basically alone. No one in Britain wanted to go to war. Everyone wanted to avoid it at all costs. He was the only man who was strong enough, brave enough to to uh, to basically help his country get through this really dark period. It's called the darkest hour because it was part of when the war began. London was being bombed, and they had to experience the bombings of the city of London. And he had to basically talk to his people the whole time, trying to encourage them, trying to let them help them not to lose hope. It wasn't until the Americans joined after the bombing at Pearl Harbor that the tide of war changed. But it was really bleak at that moment. And he had to make some incredibly difficult decisions. And the movie talks a lot about his own struggles with depression, which I wasn't even aware that he struggled with, and his own lack of self-worth. It was at those moments he was strong, but then he would come home and then he felt like he was a failure, and how difficult it was for him. So it most certainly is well worth watching if you want a good historical World War II movie. I encouraged you to watch Midway last time. This is the next one I would encourage. It's a great film. I enjoyed it tremendously.
Well, keeping with the war theme, but with a religious context, one of the movies that I would like to recommend is called Pope Pius XII Under the Roman Sky. It's a story about Pope Pius XII and his interactions with the German military, and they've already invaded Rome. And as we know, they wanted to extract all of the Jews. There was a lot of Jewish people living in Rome, but they really depended on the safety and the charity of the church. Now, Pope Pius XII, what a lot of people don't know, Pope Pius XII, before he became Holy Father, his name was Eugenio Pacelli, Cardinal Pacelli. Cardinal Pacelli was the ambassador from the Vatican to Germany. And he already had interactions with Hitler, the Hitler regime. So he already knew the tendencies of how Hitler would say one thing, but do something very different. And it got to the point where the church started to be persecuted, the Catholic Church started to be persecuted, not just the Jews.
Mm-hmm.
So he knew what Hitler would do. So then fast forward, he becomes a Holy Father. Everything's going down in Rome. They're protected, of course, the Vatican City, one of the smallest country in the world, but had its own defense. Unfortunately, they weren't able to penetrate into the Vatican. But what the Holy Father did is work with the people in the city, worked with the people in the Jewish quarters to save them, to help them. It's an amazing story. The difficulty that Pope Pius XII had to go to, there was very fine lines. But of course, being the Holy Father, being the church, being the example, was able to help them. It's a great film. I highly recommend it. Right now, it's available on Netflix, so you can view it through there. Interestingly, I won't give too much away, but the Holy Father, Pope Pius XII, there's a little scene right there. He was able to identify a Catholic that was working at the highest ranks of the German military, the German army, and he was able to talk to him and have a conversation. I won't say what it was all about, but it's revealed in the movie. Great film. Highly recommend it.
I just want to make a comment on this movie because it's Pope Pius XII. He is sometimes considered a controversial figure because he's sometimes criticized for not doing enough for the Jews. And some people even use a derogatory calling him Hitler's Pope because of the fact that he knew the Nazi regime. He knew many of the members of the regime. And as you put it, how Hitler operated. And so for a long time, people thought that he really cooperated with the Nazis. But one of the best stories about his life is that the chief rabbi of Rome during this period converted to Catholicism and took his name, Eugenio, uh, because of what Pope Pius XII and the church did during the Second World War. So anytime anybody always mentions to me, well, he was Hitler's Pope and all, I'm like, the chief rabbi in Rome who was witness to all of this becomes Catholic because of the work of the Holy Father and takes his name. Should tell you everything of
Yeah.
what really truly happened. So it's yeah, I think he should be a saint someday. But it certainly would. It's a great movie, and I hope people watch it.
And lastly, the during the baseball season, a great film that I like to recommend is called The Perfect Game. This one is available on Amazon Prime. I'm not sure about Netflix, but it's a story of a little league team from Monterrey, Mexico. It's one of those from rags to riches, so to speak. Didn't have a baseball team at all. All they knew was the Brooklyn Dodgers because that's what they were able to broadcast on any, if they had a radio. That those are the only games they were able to listen to. So they knew all the names of the players, and they would just like any 11, 12-year-old kid playing little league baseball. They imagine themselves as certain players. So they end up there's a former Major League Baseball player that ends up arriving into their town, and the kids find out about him, and they're able to convince him to be their coach to create their team. And of course, they're all Catholic boys, and the priest there, Cheech, of all people, Cheech Marin is the plays the priest,
I saw
and
that.
but he's very involved in the development of this team. Long story short, I mean, it's not a secret because it's public knowledge, and it's a true story. Monterrey, Mexico ends up making it all the way to the championship game of the Little League World Series. Pretty much beating everybody by large margins. But it's interesting because they're all Catholic boys, and this is shown revealed very very strongly throughout the movie. From the beginning, of course, with the priest, but also their prayer life and how much they give everything recognition to our Lord for their success. They end up winning the championship, and the pitcher Angel, pictured there, ends up throwing the only perfect game to be thrown in a Little League championship game from that team from Monterrey, Mexico.
I think I just found out what I'm going to watch tonight. Then it's a great movie.
It's a great film. So those are our recommendations. Take a look at them. Again, available. Some of them are available on Netflix. A couple of them are available on Amazon Prime. So Father mentioned that the movie Fatima has just been released. That's another one that perhaps we can take a look at if you're able to go to the theater. It's available in the theater. It is available for rent on Amazon. It's not one of those $2.99 or $3.99 rents. It's a little bit more expensive than that. But perhaps in the future, Father and I will take a look at it and give our thoughts on it. It's looking at the trailer, it looks very well done. Has some very good acting in it. So maybe that's something also as a suggestion people might want to take a look at And
I
that,
think, yeah, great idea. I think that I definitely want to watch it. I think you said you would want to watch it. And then when we have, then we'll let you know what we think.
right.
But like he said, from the trailer and from the hype that's been built up, it would have been a great to go see it had this pandemic not hit us. But I think it's also wonderful. It's in the movie theater down my house, which is like less than a mile from my home, um, at the Alamo Draft House. It it's the I think it's the only new movie showing right there. This theater is showing a lot of old movies right now, I guess to kind of get the feel. This is the first time the theater is open. And which is the new movie? A movie about our Blessed Mother. That cannot be by mistake. Uh, and so there's got to be something. That's why my interest is piqued because this seems to be very much her way. And so I want to watch it and see, what I hear. But I've heard already from a lot of people, uh, be prepared to be in tears and be prepared to feel emotional because of the story that we all know, the Our Lady's apparitions to the shepherd children in Fatima, Portugal, at the beginning of the 20th century. So we'll let you know what we think.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, if you have any thoughts or suggestions about topics for us, or even movie suggestions, let us know. Father and we do have a list, but we don't want to reveal everything. This episode would be way too long. So there are others that we have been suggested to watch, and we'll be talking about those in upcoming episodes. So again, thanks for joining us. Be safe. Pray for us. Be assured of our prayers. Pray for one another. Cover your face and don't touch it too often.
Good advice.
God
God bless
bless.
you all. Bye.